We got one guest here to round out this Monday, February 24th edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is professional handicapper Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com, as well as BettersSportsPicks.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
Pretty well, man. I wanted to start off today's segment by saying props to you for doing the baseball preview article again. All the articles, I should say, the guide. I have to tell you guys, I don't just say this because Adam is my friend and we do this show together. That baseball research is second to none. You're not going to find that kind of work anywhere else. So if you haven't looked at that in previous years, I highly suggest that.
Well, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. It takes a lot of time, but you know what? It helps me organize my thoughts for the season. It'll help everybody else kind of get into the right mindset for the season here. And, of course, that coming out last Wednesday and Thursday with the team previews, Friday with the PDF, should be up on Amazon here early in the week as well. Plenty of ways to get it over a month until opening day, so lots of time to digest it because, well, to be honest, it is a relatively long read, but I definitely appreciate the props for that. Thank you so much, man. And we got a lot of college basketball stuff to get to here as we kick off this week ahead. And something we wanted to make sure that we spent some time on here is that for quite a few conferences, in fact, 13 of them, this is the last week of the regular season. So as we go through the top of today's segment, we'll talk about some of those conference tournaments. We'll talk about some of the conference tournaments where not everybody gets into the field. And obviously here, motivation can be a big factor the last couple weeks of the regular season.
Yeah, this is the time of the year where you start thinking about who cares about this game, who doesn't care about this game. And you also have to keep in mind that it's still price dependent because you know how we get these spots where it's, this team has to win this game, but they're really not that good. So while you want to handicap that, you at the same time don't want to overrate that. So I think it's an interesting time of the year to where, as a handicapper, I think it's a time of the year where you don't want to bet too many games. I actually like betting quite a bit of volume most of the season. This is the time of the year where I think you have to be at least somewhat careful because it can be hard to understand motivation from one game to another, especially when two teams don't care too much. Maybe you want to play the over based on the fact that there's probably going to be less defense. But these questionable motivation games can be difficult. I think it's good that we're going to point out some of these ones where some teams should care more than others.
Yeah, and as we take a look here again, we will be back on the air on Monday, March 2nd, which is the day before conference tournaments begin. March 3rd begins the Atlantic Sun, the Big South, the Horizon, and the Patriot League. March 4th is actually going to be the Mountain West. We also have the Ohio Valley. And then on March 5th, we get the West Coast Conference. We get the Missouri Valley Conference. No, I think one tournament starts on March 6th. A couple start on March 7th, including the Colonial. So this is the last week of the regular season for some of those really small conferences that are out there, which also means there are some important games, some games with seeding on the line, some games where maybe buys in the conference tournament are on the line. And, of course, in some of these really small conference tournaments, too, like the America East, like the Atlantic Sun, the Big South, you've got campus games throughout the tournament to where home court advantage could wind up being a really big factor. So some games really do matter, some games don't, and that will also impact the totals too.
Yeah, absolutely. The totals market is very interesting this time of the year, and this is a fairly widely known concept. So I want to say it, and I want to say that, keep this in mind as far as totals, whether you want to bet overs or unders. If you want to take unders, I think you want it to be a game where both teams care. It's a game where both teams are pretty good late in the season. If you look at this, there are some pretty strong angles with teams that are 60%, both teams over 60% wins late in the season playing against each other. Maybe they're playing for the league title or something like that in one of the last couple of regular season games. The under's done really well in that case. So the over has done well when you take two teams that are 40 or 45% wins playing against each other, that it really doesn't matter to them. Now, I will say, if you want to do that, also you want to play the over early in games like that, and you want to play the under early in the games that I mentioned a minute ago, because like I said, I think, this is becoming a more widely known concept. But at the same time, you want to be careful about this, because if there is a game between two teams who aren't very good, but at the same time, they have to win this game to get into their conference tournament, I think that game means more.
Well, and speaking of that, we can just kind of use the Ivy League as an example because, first of all, you love the Ivy League. So anytime we get a chance to talk about it, I make it a point to do it. But only 4 of the 8 teams in the Ivy League make the conference tournament. And on Friday, I wrote up a preview of Princeton and Harvard. And when you look at the Ivy League here, at least going into play this past weekend, Dartmouth was 3 games behind Harvard, Penn, and Brown. So you've got 3 teams at the bottom of the Ivy League that right now don't really have a whole lot to play for except for playing spoiler. And there are other conferences where not everybody makes it. In the America East, only the top 8 teams out of the 9 are going to make it. So teams like Maine and Binghamton look to be on the chopping block. In the Atlantic Sun, North Alabama is one of those transitioning teams to Division I. They are ineligible for postseason play. So their last game will be their last regular season game. Only 12 of the 14 teams from Conference USA make the conference tournament. In the Horizon League, Detroit Mercy is ineligible because of some NCAA penalties and sanctions. So their last regular season game is their final game. In the Northeast Conference, Merrimack, who could very well win the conference in the regular season, they're one of those transitioning teams. So all they're playing for right now is that regular season championship because they can't go to the conference tournament. That's also a conference where the bottom 2 teams are excluded, which right now looks like Wagner and Central Connecticut State. The Southland Conference also only takes the top 8. So you've got some teams that will be eliminated from their conference tournaments. They won't qualify for them. Then you've got teams playing for buys, playing for double buys, things of that sort. Take a few minutes here this weekend and next weekend to see what these conference tournament structures look like and see what these teams really have to play for. Because if you can get a double bye and you only have to win the semifinals and the finals to punch your ticket to the NCAA tournament, which is the case in a conference like the Ohio Valley, that means a lot.
Oh, yeah, that double bye is really important. If you can get something like that, you're going to play really hard for it. And I think the other thing I would like to look for is, some of these conferences you pointed out, like let's say this Conference USA, you got some teams at the bottom there who are fighting for the last positions. A team like UTEP really has more talent than some of those other teams at the bottom. You would think that, they may be able to rise up enough to get into the end of that conference tournament. I would look for teams who, coming into the year, they were supposed to be better than what they are. They have enough talent that you would think that, they're certainly one of the top 10 or 12 teams or whatever it is in that conference. I think that teams like that would be good teams to back here in spots like this, because I think they have enough pride and enough talent to where they could probably play their way into it. As far as some of the others, I think the Ivy League actually was a really good example. I'll give you credit for bringing up the Ivy League, which I would say is pretty rare on here. But the Ivy League, like you said, you've got 3 teams at the bottom that have nothing to play for. I mean, when those teams are playing each other late in the year, there could be some really strange games. And I would definitely lean toward the over instead of the under, especially you're going to get some pretty low numbers with teams like Columbia or Dartmouth. Because they play some of those really low-scoring, very slow-paced games. They're not going to care to want to slow the game down in the last couple games of the year, because what does it matter to them anymore? I mean, so that could be a very interesting one to keep an eye on. And I think that, pointing out the different conference structures, like you said, with the double bye in some conferences, other conference tournaments, it doesn't really matter too much whether you're the top seed or the second seed. You pretty much have the same setup. So looking into things like this is really important this last week of the regular season. Like you said, this is the last week of the regular season for these smaller conferences, and then it'll be next week for the bigger conferences.
Well, and you look at a team like UTEP, I mean, yeah, as you said, they were supposed to be better than they are. That's a team fighting to get into the conference tournament. You're going to have other teams that were supposed to be better than they are that are already in the conference tournament, and maybe they don't care over the last 1 or 2 regular season games. They'll flip the switch, try to get that berth in their conference tournament, try to play their 3 best games in a row to get that automatic ticket, whereas here in the regular season, they don't care as much. So that's always a factor with some of these teams here too. one other thing I want to ask you about, at least as far as motivation goes, like we talked about, last week of the regular season for a lot of small conferences, the following week will be the last week of the regular season for everybody else, means you're going to have a lot of senior days. What does senior day mean to you in a general sense?
I've heard this debated time after time, and I think that senior day is a pretty big unknown. I mean, I think it's better to be honest than it is to try to blow smoke here. And I'm just going to say that I don't really know what senior day means. I know that some teams can come out very off kilter because, this is senior day and there's a lot of pressure. Everybody's there to watch. Probably would tend to go against that team in the first half more than anything else and probably want to back that team in the second half. But I don't have any great angle that, I think is going to be, senior day. You've got to blindly bet the under, bet the over, back that team, go against that team. Honestly, I think that that can become a bit narrative based where some people just want to use senior day as a reason to make a bet where I don't know that that's the case in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I understand both sides of the coin, but at the same time, I mean, it can be an emotional day, especially if you've got a senior, say somebody like a Mike Daum from South Dakota State last year, somebody like that who just means everything to the program, rewrote all the records, something like that. I mean, yeah, it's kind of bittersweet, but at the same time, you hope that he's going on to bigger and better things. So, again, I mean, it's I guess it's in the eye of the beholder, but to me, it's not really something that pushes me one way or another when it comes to a bet. Let's see if we can push our listeners one way or another here in a handful of games for this week. And obviously, recording this here on Monday, we don't have any lines out for these games, but we still have plenty to talk about here. We start on Tuesday, and we start in the MAC, which not a very good conference here this year at all whatsoever. But we have an interesting game on Tuesday night between Akron and Bowling Green. Pretty important one here in the MAC East Division. And a Bowling Green team that got blown out in the first meeting when they played at the Jar in the Rubber City.
Yeah, both these teams have several games left, so the MAC tournament's not here for a little while. Dylan Fry quit the team for Bowling Green and then comes back. I think that's certainly an interesting case where, you're not going to see that too often. And Dylan Fry, a guard that played almost all the time, very important to his team. Certainly important part of this Bowling Green offense. To me, they didn't have him in that first game. I think that means a lot. They lost 74-59 in that one. Fry coming back, while it may be a strange occurrence, you're not used to a guy coming back after he quits the team. I think that it should help them quite a bit here. And I will say that, we've talked about this a little bit already. Nobody in the MAC is really that good. And I don't really trust Akron laying a number here on the road. I think my lean here would be toward Bowling Green. I also lean toward the under a bit. I think this game is a fairly important game here. First game was a low-scoring game where both teams shot it really poorly. I'd be curious to see what kind of total we get. If we get a total north of 150, I probably lean to the under in this one, and I also lean toward taking the home dog.
Well, and you look at the games without Fry here, and they play that Toledo game, they play that big rivalry game, and they get that victory. And in fact, they scored 85 points in the process. That's kind of that, not that he's a superstar by any means, but it's kind of that superstar subtraction theory where a team's missing a big player, they wind up rallying. And the thing about Fry is that he has the highest assist rate on this team. So he's kind of the facilitator for the offense. They temporarily rally in that game against Toledo. Then they play that game against Akron, and they have a season low 0.819 points per possession. Get a few days of practice in, kind of rally, play well there against Ball State. So you do wonder how this game goes differently having a player like him back, in particular because, man, I know that Akron is probably the best team in this conference, but they've been very inconsistent this year.
Yeah, this is a conference tournament that I'm looking forward to talking about because it's going to be wide open. Akron is, I guess, the best team in the conference. I mean, you kind of think about it, and you see some of Akron's performances, and you wonder how they could be the best team in the conference. Buffalo's a lot worse than I thought they would be this year. So, having said that, Buffalo beat Akron earlier this year. I believe that was at Akron. So, this is a conference that's going to be wide open. I think this should be a good game. I'm going to guess that Bowling Green is catching, 3 or 3.5 points in this game. I probably won't bet this game. I would lean Bowling Green plus the points, and I also lean to the under.
All right, so a big one here in the Big Ten coming up on Tuesday night. Iowa and Michigan State. Awesome win for Iowa last Thursday. They knock off Ohio State 85-76. They were able to have a big offensive showing against what's been a pretty good Buckeyes defense here throughout the course of the season. Michigan State, people are going to say, yeah, it was Nebraska, and I get that, but it was also on the road, and they won by 21 points. Maybe something of a get-right game for Tom Izzo's team after losing 4 of their previous 5. What do you see here from this one Tuesday night in East Lansing?
So I have quite a few thoughts on this one. I'll first start off by saying Iowa is just a completely different team playing away from home versus at home. Really good home court advantage. I think you could argue that they've gotten a good whistle at home this year. Some of their free throw stats at home versus on the road are pretty dramatically different. So Iowa, a team that, Luka Garza is a really good player. And I mean, you don't find big men as skilled as he is very often and very fundamentally sound. He can also step out and hit the three. The Spartans have more guys that could guard him than do most guys in the Big Ten, most teams in the Big Ten. Because, Garza, really, Caleb Wesson couldn't stop him at all for Ohio State. Many people haven't been able to stop him. I think for Iowa, the big question is, are they going to play man or are they going to play zone here? Because they've been trying to play zone to hide their bad defense. The problem with this is Michigan State in the top 4% in the country against zone defense. So they've been really, really good offensively against the zone. And really, if Iowa tries to play a zone here, you would think the Spartans really beat up this zone, especially with their offensive rebounds as well. It's hard to rebound out of the zone. Iowa is playing that zone not really because they want to, but because they've been so bad in man-to-man defense. I think Michigan State can beat that zone defense. I think there could be a good amount of points in this game. I will say that, it's hard to back the Spartans laying points based on the way they've been playing here of late. They lose the game at home to Penn State, have a bad performance at Michigan, lose at home to Maryland. At the same time, I'm hoping that makes this line shorter because I would lean Michigan State in this game, certainly. I think that Michigan State matches up better with Iowa than a lot of teams do against Luka Garza. And at the same time, like I said, Iowa has pulled using that zone defense to trick Minnesota and Ohio State a bit. I don't think that works against Michigan State.
Well, and it sounds like you're kind of looking towards the over here. So yes. Where do you sort of have this total?
I think this total is probably going to be 153, 153.5, somewhere in that range. A lot of totals that are that high get bet down on the open. So maybe it opens 154 and, finishes 152 or 153 or something like that. But I do lean to the over. I think that Iowa wants to push the pace pretty often. At the same time, Michigan State, not a team that really tries to slow the game down. And if Iowa does play that zone defense, which usually makes the game lower scoring, I think Michigan State scores pretty easily on that zone.
Well, a game where it could be very tough to take the over here on Wednesday night, Virginia and Virginia Tech. Virginia won the first meeting here this year 65-39, 0.624 points per possession for this Virginia Tech team. They were 13 of 48 from the floor in that game. Obviously an embarrassing effort for them there in Charlottesville. Now the game's in Blacksburg. Does this one go any differently for the Hokies?
I remember that game pretty well. I went into that game having 2 leans. And I thought, I don't want to play both of these because I don't like this game enough. But I want to play something here because I liked both the under and the side on Virginia Tech plus the points. I took the wrong thing there. So Virginia Tech plus the points didn't work out at all. The under was a good play, certainly. Virginia has been a little bit 59 possessions. They score 73 points. Against North Carolina, they put up 64 points on the road. And then against Boston College, 78 points in a game with only 60 possessions. So Virginia has certainly been better on offense than they were. Now, am I saying I want to take the over in this game? No, I'm not. I just would be afraid to take under 110 or under 109.5 or something. I mean, these numbers get so really low that all it takes is a stretch of, a few made threes in a row and you're in trouble. So I would caution on taking too low of an under. At the same time, what do I make of the side here? Virginia Tech's a tough team for me to figure out. I mean, they really have not been playing very well. I think Virginia Tech is a well-coached team. I think Mike Young's a good coach. They've played 3 overtime games here in the past month. Double overtime against Carolina that they won at home, and overtime loss at home against Boston College, which is a pretty bad loss, and then the triple overtime loss at home against Miami. So, I don't know what to make of them. I think I know what Virginia is. I don't know that I want to bet this game, but I think that Virginia Tech will be ready for this game. At the same time, Virginia is playing better, and Virginia is a very well-coached team. So I would caution against playing the under at an extremely low number, but I don't have anything strong here.
All right, maybe we got something stronger here as we go down to the SoCon. And we love to talk about the SoCon. We'd love to talk about mid-majors and under-the-radar conferences in general. But we've actually got 2 games of interest here in the SoCon on Wednesday night. Let's start with the one that, I think is probably going to draw a little bit more attention. That is Furman on the road at UNC Greensboro. 2 very, very good teams here, obviously. Greensboro won the first game by 13. That was on the road at Furman. Do the Paladins come back and get a little bit of revenge here?
So here's another game that I have quite a few thoughts on. I do have a stronger opinion on this game. I will say that Michigan State, leaning Michigan State and the over, I like that one pretty well. But this one as well, I'll say Furman lost at home, like you said. We're really pretty embarrassed in that game. Road revenge is generally a good angle, and you can hit 55% ATS or 54% ATS just taking road revenge. In this one, I'm going to go against that. I think the matchup here favors UNC Greensboro. I really like their coaching staff. I think Greensboro is a really well-coached team. Furman plays East Tennessee State and then Wofford before this one. So they play 2 of the other top teams. I don't think that does them any favors here, especially because you look at Furman, they really don't play very many guys. Their bench is weak. Their starters have to play a lot of minutes. Also, UNC Greensboro with the full court press, they've been very good with full court pressure so far this year. And Furman's turnover rate, you'd say, well, their turnover rate looks pretty good. But if you look at them only against the press, their turnover rate is 26.4% against full court pressure. That's really, really weak. So UNC Greensboro, to me, likely to use that full court press and really bother Furman. UNC Greensboro then can get some quick scores off of that. Greensboro is certainly the better half-court defense as well than Furman, and they're the more deep team, like I mentioned before. So while I usually like to go with the road revenge angle, I like UNC Greensboro here. I'm curious to see what kind of line we get. I don't think we'll have to lay too many points here, but if we're laying 3.5 or 4 points, I think I like Greensboro in this one.
Furman with 17 turnovers there in the first game. Greensboro had 11. So extra possessions there in that regard. Greensboro had 11 offensive rebounds to Furman's 8. Those extra possessions really, really matter. And that's why I know you're big at looking at offensive rebounding. And obviously you always want to pay attention to turnover rates. And look, Furman is just not a good offensive rebounding team. They haven't been all year long. And Greensboro kind of speed them up a little bit. Maybe does lead to some more turnovers and some extra possessions there for the Spartans. But let's go to the other game here in the SoCon, because while the other game may be better between Furman and Greensboro, this one may be more important for the simple fact that East Tennessee State is kind of on that at-large bubble. Last week, they did beat Furman, a game that you and I talked about on this very show. Now they get a tough test from Wofford on the road. And if East Tennessee State wants to stay in that at-large discussion, they don't have any margin for error here against the Wofford team. It's not as good as last year, but still very solid.
Yeah, East Tennessee State has a pretty favorable schedule here down the stretch. This is their tough game. So you would think that they would be up for this game. Like you said, we talked about that Furman game. East Tennessee State did take care of business in that game and cover. So we were on the right track in that game, certainly. Wofford is better than their record would indicate. If you look at this team and say they're 16-12, they've lost four games straight in the conference. They have really lost some close games. This is a good team. Obviously, they won at North Carolina. We know North Carolina is not what they've been in the past, but that's still a really big win here. Wofford's a tricky team, and East Tennessee State, like you said, they really can ill afford to make a misstep at this point, because if they lose here and then they lose in the conference tournament, I don't think they're getting in the big dance, and I want them to get in the big dance. So hopefully they don't do that. But East Tennessee State, a really well-coached team. I've said this many times on the podcast. I'll say this again. I feel like East Tennessee State is really, really well coached by Steve Forbes. I think that it's pretty surprising to me that he hasn't gotten a bigger job than this, and I don't think that will last. East Tennessee State, a really aggressive team, a team that really goes after the offensive rebounds. If you look at Wofford has been very good on the defensive glass, especially in the conference, only giving up 23.7% second chance. So this is a Wofford team that I think will give them a good game. I think this game would probably be a lower scoring game. So I'm going to say my strongest lean here is the under. I don't really have any good feel for which side I want in this game.
All right, so let's jump ahead to Saturday here, where we got a couple of lower major conference games, I guess I would say. And we haven't talked a whole lot of Summit League yet here on the show, but obviously we will once their conference tournament rolls around. South Dakota State takes on North Dakota State. Now, South Dakota State coming off of a rivalry game against South Dakota. That was a revenge spot for them as well. And as we know, win or lose, coming off of a rivalry game is a very challenging thing to do. And it's doubly challenging when you talk about the fact that, this game has substantial standings implications for this upcoming conference tournament.
Absolutely. This game is Thursday night. So a Thursday night game here in the Summit League. These are pretty similar teams, to be honest with you. You look at the breakdown of these two teams. They're both strong offensively. Neither team forces any turnovers on defense. They don't foul much or give up second chance points. Let's be honest, in the Summit League, nobody plays defense. So everybody's good at offense. Nobody's really very good at defense. North Dakota State's first in the Summit League in defense, but they're really not very good at defense. Both teams shoot it well. This game's going to mean a lot. So you would think that the defense would be a little bit better than normal, or else they'll play a bit slower pace because this game means so much. It's important to say this is South Dakota State's last game. North Dakota State plays on Saturday the 29th, where South Dakota State, this is their final game. So, this is a game that means a lot to who will win the Summit League. Again, I'm going to say I don't have a strong lean here in this game. If they put a number high enough, maybe I take the under based on it being one of those late regular season unders between two good teams. But not a game that I love to bet, but it is a game that I think is very fascinating because these are the two best teams in the Summit League. And I'm looking forward to getting to talk about this conference a little bit more, too, when we get to conference tournament time.
So am I. And let me just ask you this here as we kind of plant a seed for the conference tournament. I mean, are either of these teams potentially dangerous, to a 14-3 or a 15-2 or maybe even a 12-5 type of matchup?
I don't think they are. I think the Summit League is down some. I think that South Dakota State was the favorite to win this league. South Dakota State, Wilson's a good player for them. Tyson Ward's a really good player for North Dakota State. But I don't feel like they have somebody like Mike Daum that can really dominate a game. Okay, yeah, I know that was a bad one. But this is a league where I think they're down quite a bit. I think they would get a fairly low seed. So I don't think we'd have a 5-12 or anything. I think it'd be like a 3-14 or something like that. So I think that neither of these teams are locked to win the Summit League. I don't think that, I certainly think it's possible that somebody that's rated third or fourth or fifth could win the Summit League conference tournament.
I like that. Dominate. Very nice. Well done. I'm sure that wasn't intentional, but I'm going to give you props for that one to be sure here. One more game for Thursday to talk about, then one more for Friday that I just want to hit on here real quickly. But we go out to the WAC, New Mexico State and Grand Canyon. Now, Grand Canyon isn't as good as they've been in the past, but I've got a sneaking suspicion there's a reason why you want to talk about this game.
Yeah, I think you know why I want to talk about this game. New Mexico State, let's look at what they are in the conference. They're unbeaten. They're 21-6 overall. They're not getting a at-large bid no matter what. So, it doesn't matter if they go undefeated in the conference or not. They just have to win the conference tournament. Grand Canyon a really good home court advantage. I have to be honest, this is a spot where I'd really like to go watch a game at Grand Canyon in person. That home court advantage looks really impressive. Grand Canyon has been disappointing this year. However, they have certainly played better basketball of late here, rounding into form a little bit here. New Mexico State is a very, very respected team by the betting markets. So I think this number will open at a lower number than what it'll close. So if you like Grand Canyon, like I am leaning toward, I think you want to wait till later on. I like New Mexico State a lot as a team. I'm not doubting that they're better than Grand Canyon, but New Mexico State has beaten Grand Canyon many, many times in the last few years by 2-3 points, overtime, really close games. This is a really good spot for Grand Canyon. I mean, if Grand Canyon were ever going to get up and pull an upset, this is a good spot for it. I don't know if they'll win the game. I do think that they could be a good look at, +6 or something like that.
Yeah, and of course, in the first meeting, Grand Canyon got beat by 20. So they're used to playing close games against this team. Then all of a sudden they get blown out in one. Obviously, this is a game that the Antelopes have very much had circled here throughout the course of the conference play season. We move on to Friday real quickly here. We haven't talked a whole lot of Horizon League because, quite frankly, it's kind of a boring conference this year where Wright State and Northern Kentucky are just so much better than everybody else. Well, they play again here in the regular season finale for both of these teams on Friday night. Wright State won the first meeting at home by 32 points. That was a Friday night. It was on ESPNU, and the Raiders very much showed up in that game. Can Northern Kentucky return the favor here with this game on Friday night and with ESPN on hand once again?
I don't know what to make of Northern Kentucky. I mean, this Northern Kentucky team has been Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, they lost so badly to Wright State, like you said. And then I remember this game on Sunday, February 16th against Illinois Chicago. I was watching that game briefly, and this was a game you didn't want to watch for very long, definitely. UIC was, I believe, maybe a 10-point underdog or something like that. I don't have it in front of me, but I know they were a big underdog at Northern Kentucky. At one point, they were winning 73-33. UIC was against Northern Kentucky. That said a lot about Northern Kentucky to me. I know they were 4 for 32 from three-point range in that game, but this team is not really that good. And I think the Horizon League is definitely down from what they have been in past years. Northern Kentucky, a team that has had some injury troubles throughout the year. They're healthy now. They were even healthy for that loss to UIC. To me, I trust Wright State more than I trust Northern Kentucky. At the same time, do I really want to bet them in this game? Not really. I mean, this is one that I'd rather pass. Some of those other games we talked about earlier, I have stronger opinions on.
Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at huntersportspicks.com and also bettorsportspicks.com. What's going on over there right now, man?
Yeah, I've got a lot going on. It's been a really good run here of late, to be honest. I try not to toot my horn too often. I like to just give information here on the show. 17-4 run. Special offer here now through March 15th, which is Selection Sunday, which, got to be honest with you, that's coming pretty soon, So college basketball, all my plays now through March 15th. I'm going to run a special, $199 for all my plays through Selection Sunday, so you can kind of test out my service. You can message me at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter or Kyle at bettorsportspicks.com. And then I'm keeping up the special that has been up over at huntersportspicks.com, and that is the Basketball Fanatic Pass. That's all plays in college basketball and the NBA through the NBA Finals for $599.
One thing I do want to mention real quickly here, because of a scheduling situation, we are recording this a little bit early here. So that 17-4 run, hopefully something that you've built on over the course of the weekend. I just want to make sure I throw that out there because, like I said, I'm tied up a little bit on Monday, so we are recording this a little bit early here. But nonetheless, you've been doing very well, and hopefully, man, that continues here as we finish out the college basketball regular season. Next week, we'll at least have Kyle on for the regular Monday segment. We'll see if we can maybe do something later in the week and hit on some more of these conference tournaments as well. But it's getting to be our favorite time of the year, man.
I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to the next time we talk because that means conference tournaments.